So, for those of my listeners who do not yet know your experience, the summary is that you were a 32-year-old former school teacher living in Somalia as an aid worker, helping to teach kids how to avoid landmines
Mhm.
at the moment when you were kidnapped along with a coworker and held hostage in the desert for 93 days
Mhm.
before being rescued by SEAL Team 6.
Mhm.
As a kidnapping survivor who spent 93 days in the desert with Somali pirates who were holding you for ransom under constant threat, do
Mhm.
you believe that it is our helplessness or our refusal to accept our helplessness that hurts us more?
I'm not sure that I actually resonate with the term helplessness because I don't think we're helpless at all.
Wow.
I have a strong belief around the I the idea that there's a difference between an option and a choice,
Hmm.
and I think oftentimes we use those two words interchangeably, but they're not the same. I had three options, and they were very fixed. The first one was I could try to run away. I could try to escape. But I looked around and, I'm out in the middle of the desert. I have no idea how close I am to a village. I don't know which direction because we were constantly moving. I couldn't carry enough water, because the desert's hot during the day. So I figured that wasn't a viable option, right? And the second one I had in front of me was I could end my life. I understand why people would choose that, but at the end of the day, there's something about being faced with death over and over again that makes you realize how much you really want to live. So that didn't feel like a viable option for me. And the third option was to sit and wait. But what I realized, I guess what I discovered is that within our options, we have a multitude of choices. And it's for me, when I understood I had I had a vast variety of choices within the option of sitting and waiting about what I could do with my time, how I could choose to think. And that definitely pulled me out of like a helpless mindset because actually I wasn't helpless at all.
How much control do any of us really ever have over anything? Is it more important to be safe in body or in mind? What does safety even really mean? Jessica Buchanan had 93 days to think about questions like this while she was held captive in 2011 somewhere deep in the Somali desert. A 32-year-old American schoolteacher who was working with a Danish aid organization, she was helping teach children how to avoid being blown up by leftover landmines. She had just finished up a meeting and was en route to fly back home when the car carrying her and a coworker was ambushed by gunmen who she would later learn were tipped off by their security guard for only $100,000. Driven into the desert and forced to participate in a mock execution, the good news was that she was worth more to them alive than dead. The bad news was that she spent the next 93 days living entirely outdoors, being moved around in the Somali desert by a gang of pirates, men who would routinely berate her, threaten to sell her to AlShabab, and hold a gun to her head. Most days, she ate only a tin of tuna and perhaps some canned pineapple. The constant threat of assault paled in comparison, though, to the fear of losing her own mind, which she realized was deep-seated, through a miscarriage that she never mentioned to her captors, to the months of taking stock of every single life choice she had made up until the moment of her kidnapping, to the night when she was saved by SEAL Team 6 on the direct orders of President Obama. Jess Buchanan could never shake her belief that this was not meant to be her end. Not only did she manage to connect with kidnappers in ways that are now taught in classes, not only did she manage to truly connect with her kidnappers, but she empathized with them and reached the conclusion that, in fact, her kidnapping was just not personal. And thanks to a kidney infection that triggered her rescue and a husband who never stopped fighting for her, she managed to do what the SEALs told her was the most impressive part. She survived. Life is a classroom, she says, and today she gets to live that lesson and impart that wisdom to her two children, alongside her wonderful husband who helped save her. in the warmth of a life which she knows, better than any of us, was never guaranteed.
There's a book that I read right after college. I don't know if you've ever heard it, Shantaram.
Oh my gosh, yes. In fact,
Yeah.
I have a funny story about that book.
Well, I bring it up because the opening quote came to mind when I heard about your story. And it starts with, "It took me a long time and most of the world to learn what I know about love and fate and the choices we make. But the heart of it came to me in an instant while I was chained to a wall and being tortured. I realized somehow through the screaming of my mind that even in that shackled, bloody helplessness, I was still free. Free to hate the men who were torturing me, or free to forgive them."
Mhm.
I'm not really interested in the concept of forgiveness with you because I think that's probably got so many layers to it. I'm interested in the concept of autonomy.
Mhm.
And so when you talk about options versus choices,
Mhm.
survivors of a one-time near-death experience have a different r- memory of it, right? It's not the same thing as prolonged, ongoing terror. And
Mhm.
people will describe levels of dissociation. Do you think did you ever think you might actually lose touch with reality?
I think that was probably my biggest fear
Really?
outside of like the, obvious of being killed or being assaulted.
Yeah.
Um, I had a very strong fear that this would drive me to insanity. And I had some experience with that. I watched my mom, who had suffered tremendous trauma early in her childhood. I watched her basically like lose her mind for about 3 years after my brother was born. I was 12, somewhere in there, and I have like always been petrified that that would happen to me.
Was it a severe postpartum situation that
It
you were
was, but
witnessing?
it was clinical depression and complex PTSD, and it was what, the late 80s, early 90s, so we didn't know what we know now, and it was just, she was able to get help, but it was hard, and it was hands down has always been my biggest fear, that
Wow.
I would like lose my mind. And so that was like day 2, like what I was very cognizant of is, okay, I need to get a plan together here because preserving my mind is of utmost importance to me
Mm.
because, Amnesty International used to define torture as being detained without basically knowing when the end date was going to come, when your release would come. And I'll tell you what, being detained and not knowing, like if you're a prisoner, if you're in prison, you have a sentence and you can mark the days on the wall and count yourself down, even if it's 7,362 days.
Mhm.
That's a long time, right? And a lot longer than 93. But if you don't know whether it's going to be 5 or 12,000 days, that drives people insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't want that to be me. And so I had to, now I know that activities that I engaged in mentally and the practices that and rituals that I established are all very common for people to do while they're being confined or while they're being held hostage. It's funny how like humans are really just all the same, and when we're like stripped down to just our survival mechanisms. But that was, yeah, that was my biggest fear. And today, even still, if you ask me what I'm grateful for, the first top 3 things that I'm grateful for outside of my, husband and my kids is to be of sound mind.
So the fears that we carry with us, I'm not going to say we invite them, but I am going to say our soul knows something. And I do want to hear your Shantaram story.
Oh my God. I read it while I was in Somalia,
No, really?
but it was so long that I quit 50 pages from the end, which I have never done before in my life. I finish books
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a writer, I'm a publisher, like I finish books and I just couldn't take it.
Just kept going and
Yes,
going.
so however, I gotta say that the series, have you seen the series?
I haven't. It's
It's
on my
really
list.
good. It's
Is
very
it?
good. Yeah, it's definitely worth watching. Yeah.
What a life.
Yeah, seriously.
But let's take a little bit of a step back. Can you describe for my listeners the moment when you were kidnapped? And when did you realize this was for ransom and you were not going to die that night?
Mm. Okay, well, I guess, yeah, we have to back up to October 25th, 2011. I was in Galkayo, Somalia. I was based in Hargeisa, Somaliland, so in northern Somalia, which at the time it was the hub for international development and aid agencies. Somalia wasn't like being stationed in Kenya. It was definitely different. It was a hardship post. It was not a family duty station. But my husband had worked in Somalia and with Somalis, and his expertise was in governance, and so working with parliamentarians and capacity building, and even like the organization he worked for actually built the parliament in Hargeisa, and they were really cool. They were I'm sure they're still very cool people, but really making inroads for democracy and progress and holding like peaceful elections and just education, and it was good work. And so we met in Nairobi when I was teaching about it 2 years before all of this, 3 years before all of this happened. We got married and I moved to Somaliland with him. And I ended up working for a Danish demining group. They are the mine action unit of the Danish Refugee Council. So they work in environments that are usually post-conflict, post-Civil War. And sometimes they're doing mine clearance because a lot of these communities and outlying areas are uninhabitable, or they're nomadic, or they're pastoralist, and so they cannot send their animals out to graze or get water because there are explosives still left from Civil War.
It's just
So
not safe, yeah.
yeah, it's not safe. It's not safe for kids. And so there's a huge waste in terms of like resources, right? Because they can't access it safely. So what we did some clearing in some areas, but we also found that there was a practice of stockpiling explosives because people didn't know what they were, or if they did know what they were, they stockpiled them like under their kitchen tables because they thought they were worth money, or they thought they needed them to protect themselves because they had lived in unstable environments. And so who knew when the next civil war was going to break out, right? But then they could explode and kill everybody in the house. And so we did a lot of education. And of course, I get touted as going to Africa to help children. Well, I mean, indirectly, I mean, yes, I'm a teacher. And of course I was helping whoever I could, trying, but this was my job. I was working for this organization. And kids were among, the victims who were picking up unexploded ordnances or landmines, and, they would explode. So I use my teaching skill set to create materials and programming that like actually worked for kids. So it was really fun. It was probably one of the best jobs I've ever had in my life. But I had been called to go down to southern Somalia to do a staff training, which was part of my job. I was a regional education advisor, so I traveled all over East Africa. And but I didn't feel good about going down there because Galkayo is a whole different ball of wax, if you will, in terms of security. I was used to traveling with security. Everywhere I went, I had security guards with me. I had drivers. Like, I wasn't allowed to go anywhere alone. They were armed guards. Maybe I can't remember the levels now, but the UN, graded certain areas in terms of like security. There were protocols we followed. I followed all of those. We were leaving our last staff training, October 25th, and we pulled through the gates. We had a driver driving us, and I say we, me and my Danish colleague, an older guy named Paul. And about 10 minutes into our drive back to the compound where we were staying and where I was, like going to pack my bags and leave the next morning, our car was overtaken by armed gunmen, and we were subsequently driven out into the desert and forced to participate in a mock execution that lasted well into the night, and then held for 93 days. You asked, like, how long did I know that I was being held for ransom? It was probably a couple of weeks before we knew we could kind of orient ourselves. We didn't know if this was ideological. We didn't know what their demands were. It was definitely over a week before we knew that the ransom demand they had set was $45 million, because what was going on in this particular area of the world at the time, there were like ship takeovers, and there were pirates, like, if you will, modern day pirates out in the Indian Ocean as a result of defending the water, because they were being overfished by commercial companies coming from India or, wherever. And I think that's how this all started, but it became a very lucrative endeavor. And so after the overtaking of the Maersk, Alabama, I don't know if you remember that. And one of the SEAL, I think it was SEAL Team 6, rescued the ship captain, Captain Phillips, and his crew. I think they were held for like 3 or 4 days. This organized crime ring, essentially, it was like the mafia. I mean, they had far-reaching webs of contacts, diaspora in the UK and the US, moved on to land.
Yeah. And that's when it became more dangerous in the region.
Yes. Yeah, because the waters were being patrolled by UN and I guess whatever the international equivalent of the Coast Guard is. So
one of the things I thought was surprising was that the Danish charity you were working with had this emergency plan that involved disconnecting all of your family's phones
yeah,
once you were kidnapped, which sounded brilliant and cruel, so that the hostage negotiator was the only person who was available to speak to them.
mm-hmm. And I don't know if I would have put all that together if Paul hadn't been there. He was the one who figured that out. But they would drive us out into the middle of the desert to make contact or have like a proof of life call. And it was the first contact we made, and it took a couple of weeks before they put us on the phone. They called a number, or no, they wanted us to call our families. I called my dad because I had his phone number memorized.
Mm-hmm.
I called my sister. Paul had called his wife and his daughter, and all the phones were disconnected. And we were just like, what in the heck? Like, what is this? What is happening? And then he was like, oh, they want it like this. And then we ended up talking to this, he called himself the communicator, a couple of times until, he wasn't the negotiator. He was just a spokesperson because he was Somali and he could speak to our kidnappers.
Essentially the translator.
Yeah.
The negotiators were able to help you. Now, there's a couple of details that you share that are really vivid. One was eating tuna and bread once a day, right?
Yeah, actually, it was just.
Have you never eaten tuna again since you came
No,
back?
I do eat it. I mean, so it's funny because I spend a lot of time on social media platforms like Instagram, and last year I made a reel talking about the tuna that I ate out of a can. Like during the beginning of the kidnapping, I didn't have anything to eat with, and my hands were dirty. And I had this powder bag, and I had a couple of like tampons, like, unused tampons in them, right? So I thought, oh, I can use the tampon applicator as like a eating utensil. And so that went like crazy viral. People were just like, tuna and a tampon applicator, what? And I'm like, yeah, it is weird, but I actually did do that for like several weeks. I have eaten tuna. Like, I like a good tuna salad. I'm not going to sit and eat it straight out of a can, but I have never eaten canned pineapple again. That I ate a lot of because it was canned tuna and canned pineapple, and that's pretty much all we got.
The ability of a human who wants to survive to MacGyver their way through things,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I really learned the extent of my resourcefulness.
Well, and I think you probably knew you were a diplomatic person. You don't go and work abroad and do the types of things that you were doing if you're not a diplomatic, outgoing, chameleon-ish type of a person,
Mhm.
which is one level. It's another level to befriend your kidnappers.
Mm.
Did you awaken to the idea that you had to form a connection with these people, or did you go into it day one thinking, I have to make these people see me as a human being?
Oh, no, I think that all of that evolves over time, with day 1 is just so disorienting, and then the fact that you don't know how long you're gonna be there, and, it's just like one giant psychological, like, game in a sense, that could cost you your life at the end. I think for me, I've always been a fairly observant person, and I knew right away that I needed to be, like, observing like my life depended on it because it did. And I think that that then helped me form connections with the right people.
At one point, you lied instinctively and said you were a mother.
Mhm.
Where did that instinct come from? You described knowing that they would be less likely to hurt a mom because
Yeah.
culture is culture.
Well, I mean, it just came out of me, and one thing that I didn't write about in Impossible Odds because I wasn't ready to process it that I've since written about is I was pregnant when I went in when this all happened. Um I I thought I wasn't, that was the last message really I sent to my husband was that I was cramping, and so I thought for sure, that my cycle was coming, so that meant I wasn't pregnant. And I think the last thing he said to me was, "Well, we've got the rest of our, we've got time. Um, don't worry about it." And I just couldn't process it at the time, but have since processed the fact that I miscarried while I was out there. So I think that that it came from that, right? Because in a sense, even though I couldn't connect the dots, then I was a mother.
Yeah, well, you
Yeah.
were.
Yeah, and I lost that life, which I'm glad and, so grateful that I didn't have to I think that would have complicated things so badly, both
Oh,
from
for
my health
sure.
perspective and also just from a negotiations perspective.
And from the
Um,
baby's health,
yeah,
just
I mean,
all of
I
it.
was petrified for days. I was paralyzed with fear, um, about how this thing could get even worse and more complicated, and then I miscarried, and so from then it was, then I was just trying to recover from that.
Did the
So I
kidnappers realize that you miscarried?
No, no, it was very early, and it was just a couple of days of, severe bleeding and pain. I just kept ripping strips from my headscarf to try to keep myself clean, um, which was difficult. But,
It can be a tremendous amount of blood, even if it's early. And I
yeah.
wonder if they gave you any grace, for example, when they thought you had your period, but in fact you were miscarrying and it's a bunch of men and you're out in the middle of
Mhm.
nowhere. Did they give you any grace and let you go wash yourself?
No, no, and I didn't I didn't even talk to Paul about it. I just kept it very much to myself. And there was such a problem with communication too. So, I would just say toilet and point out to the bushes, and they would just be like, go, like, whatever. They weren't paying that close attention to me. So it was actually, it's just very private
Yeah.
in a sense. But I had none of that, um, none of the things that I needed in order to keep myself clean and healthy and safe, which is, also why I think I contracted a urinary tract infection that then moved into
That
a
saved
kidney
your life.
infection that did save my life. Like it's all very connected. But as we do, we don't process things until we're ready. And it's taken me over 10 years to process that.
Well, thank you for sharing it,
Sure.
because I've been through it myself
Yeah.
alone. And I think it is something that it takes time to process
Mhm.
because many of us do survival mode and
Yeah.
we tell ourselves it was early, or we tell ourselves we weren't ready, or we tell ourselves
Yeah.
all of the things, but it doesn't
Yeah.
change the fact that something in your body was very primally doing something that felt sort of beautiful, right? And
Yeah.
maybe you couldn't allow yourself to feel that.
Yeah.
So I was going to veer towards this, but I'll go towards it now. Um, you went inward and you you describe deciding to use your time to try to process your life and your mother's passing. Do you think part of that came out of the miscarriage, or do you think maybe you just kind of were ready at that moment because your mom had been gone for a year to think that through?
My mom was very present with me during the kidnapping. She was who I called out to that night that I thought for sure I was going to be executed. Um, I have tried so hard to connect the timeline of this. It was early on. They would like put us in the car and drive around for hours at night. Oftentimes, there were several vehicles, like, caravans of vehicles. Everybody's heavily armed. I'm talking like wearing belts of ammunition, 1, 2 machine guns hanging out the windows of the vehicles, technicals. One time I reached down and pulled what I thought was a bottle of water out of the pocket in the seat in front of me and said it was a hand grenade. Like, it was just constantly like we were being driven around by a de facto militia, essentially, in Africa. So if that gives you any visuals, it's exactly what you would think. It was like a movie.
It just makes me
It
think
is
of
constant.
constant
You're
terror
just being constantly terrorized,
and
and
what
you're
it does to your body.
being slammed around in the back of cars. They would stop in the middle of roads and yell at me and get out to sleep. Go lay in the dirt in the road behind the car and go to sleep. I mean, it was as bad as it sounds. It was horrific. And there was one night where they were like marching us. We were walking. We were on foot. I don't know where we were going. I don't know who we were running from, but I just remember there was this bright light in the sky and it just kept getting like stronger and brighter and coming closer and closer toward us. And Paul, even who was a staunch atheist, he turned around and looked at me and in such awe and said, "I think that light is your mom." And I said, "I know it is. I know it's her." It was like, I can't explain it. It sounds totally bizarre, but
It
I
doesn't
just could
sound bizarre to
feel
me.
her so close to me. Her spirit was so close to me through the entire thing. There, I talked to her all the time. And so, yeah, it felt like the right time to process, there we had a complicated relationship, as I think probably a lot of mothers and daughters do.
Yeah.
And there was a lot to process, and I did that there. And she was there with me, I'm really I'm proud of myself actually that I used that time to for some emotional healing instead of just wasting it by spinning out and worrying about whether or not I was going to live or die
How many hours of the day can you do that?
before you drive yourself insane. And I
Right.
made it clear like I didn't want to go insane. So that that felt like productive. And even in those kind of circumstances, like I needed there to be some movement somehow. And so if that was had to be within, I wanted to come out of this for the better if I was going to come out of it. Um, if
When
that
you
makes sense.
describe going through in your mind all the moments of your life
Mhm.
and thinking you described going to the movies with your mom when you were
Mhm.
4 or
Yeah.
5, which killed
Yeah.
me because my daughter's 4 and
Yeah.
I I'm so I'm really grateful that you're okay.
Mhm.
Um, but especially because you were thinking about your mom the whole time, but when I heard you describe wanting to go through all the moments of your life and almost like catalog them or hold on to them and like relive, savor all of the moments of your life. I do a lot of that myself just in my
Mhm.
everyday life because I have my default setting is super, super grateful.
Yeah.
But as I heard you doing that, I thought, is there a part of her mind that's doing this to make peace with everything so that when this is over, I can live my best, most peaceful life? Or also, if this is the end, this is how I want to say goodbye to my life by saying thank you to all of it?
That's really beautiful. Hmm.
Because wow,
I think there was never any doubt in my mind that I was gonna survive.
that's amazing. Why?
I refused to believe that I was going to die, that this was the end of the road for me. I just couldn't, like, I don't know, I think I thought that if I, like, had that thought, then, that's kind of like a despairing well to throw myself into, and, like, how do you pull yourself out of that? Yes, I was afraid. Yes, there were times when I got a gun held to my head. I think in those moments, yes, I thought, okay, this is the end. But when things leveled out, I guess I could say not in the moments of like sheer active terror, but in the day to day of being a hostage, which is actually just really boring, to be honest,
Like when you got
because
into a routine is basically.
yeah, like even though we were moving camps, we could still get into a routine from time to time. And, I don't think that they thought it was going to take as long as it did. None of us thought this was going to take as long as it had. There had been a security advisor from another organization, real big organization like Save the Children or something like that, that had been taken in a nearby town. He had been kept for a week. I think that they thought this was going to be like a wham bam, like get our money kind of
Get the
thing.
money.
We'll take $1 million. Um, and so the longer it stretched out, the more organized I had to get with my thoughts. Like I like to better myself. Like I like to learn. And I think more so it was just like this like inner journey. I finally had time to consider why my mom did some of the things she did and why she did them the way she did them. And the same about my dad, but I'll focus more on my mom because she was gone and I was grieving
Mm.
heavily. Why I made some of the decisions that I made as a result of probably our relationship. And, I had been married once before when I was very young and it was abusive. And I think it was more about exploration and learning so that when I got out, I could do life better.
You really
Because there
altered
was this
the whole.
very, very clear awareness that if I did get out, when I did get out, like I was not going to waste any time.
It sounds almost like you turned kind of the most horrifyingly terrifying human experience, being kidnapped and being a woman
Mhm.
and miscarrying in the middle of nowhere with a
Yeah.
bunch of men. It's almost like you took the most terrifying experience possible and turned it into the most human experience.
Mm,
Because at the end of the day, reflecting and making some kind of sense of what's happened to us and what we've done with it is the human condition. Like, I
right.
think about reincarnation, I
Yeah.
think about like
Yeah.
why. There's a whole lot of what you'll never know why some things happen to you, but what are you going to do with it?
Right.
And you really did that. And, as you're talking about it, it's making me think of someone else who I interviewed, Pete Early. Besides being Pulitzer nominated and all this stuff, being amazing, he has a distinction of being the only person ever who interviewed Terrible Tom Silverstein. Terrible
Oh,
Tom
no.
Silverstein was like a mass murderer who
Yeah.
was the reason behind Supermax detention.
Yeah.
He was the first no human contact detainee in American
Oh,
history.
wow.
And
Wow.
they kept him in a room for I think almost 9 months because he murdered multiple officers at Leavenworth,
Oh my God.
besides everything he did to end up in
Yeah.
prison in the first place. And so he was kept in a room with just a mattress on the floor, lights on 24 hours a day. No phone, no TV. The guards wouldn't talk to him because they all hated him because they wouldn't even
Yeah.
say good morning, right? So he didn't know what time it was. And after a prolonged period of time, he got some privileges, and one of them was the ability to communicate with this one journalist, Pete Early. And I reached out to him to say, is it our connection with each other that makes us human? Like, did he become an animal? 9
Mm,
months, no human contact,
mm,
right? Is sort of an ultra animalistic experience.
mhm,
And what you did was turned your horror into an ultra human experience. Like,
mhm.
in a way, you got this philosophical moment that most people don't get till they're like at their deathbed,
Right. Right.
right?
And I mean, perhaps I was on my deathbed. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, I'm
I
not surprised
think
that you're proud of yourself.
that's the whole point of being human, I
Yeah.
think, is to like learn. It's all a classroom. And
It
whether
is a
we're learning
classroom.
about ourselves or we're learning about the environment around us or we're learning about other people, we're learning about evil, we're learning about compassion. Like I've learned so many lessons in my life. But those lessons that I learned while I was just sitting under a tree for 12 hours a day, um, will be the most important lessons I've ever learned. And I take those into everything that I encounter. Um, because, you know, we repeat, right? The
Oh, yeah.
patterns that we,
Louder and louder till we
yeah.
figure it out.
And it was important for me to figure out what had actually gotten me there to that point. And that took a lot of time in the aftermath. But I figured it out. And that's why I do the work that I do now in helping women share their stories. So,
We get like distance from our traumatic experiences, right? We see things, I don't even want to say differently. I think we finish processing them, or we
mhm,
have the safety to process them. And you go into fight or flight in situations like this. If you can't fight and you can't flight
mhm,
because you are kidnapped, there you didn't have that choice.
yeah.
Part of it is an internal freeze. And the way you describe processing your miscarriage, it is an internal freeze. It's not
Mhm.
safe to process that in
Yes.
that moment.
Yeah.
How has, I want to say time, but therapy as well. How has time and therapy affected your perspective on your kidnapping and on fear?
Mm. Mm. Um, Time is the secret sauce. Um, I always reference this story during the kidnapping. I was like having a meltdown one day because I was just like, and I was in a panic and I let it overcome me and overwhelm me. And it was one of those moments where Paul and I were together on a mat and I was like, how long is this thing going to take? And I remember him in my memory, he reminded me of a mix between Willie Nelson and a Danish elf because he was like just kind of like a petite man. And I'm almost 6 feet tall. So I'm like, I like to say a substantially sized person. And so he was smaller than me. And his beard had grown out really long. And he had this like piece of, I think, my headscarf like tied around his head to catch the sweat, and his glasses were broken and his face was all sunburnt and cracking, and he would sit there with his knees up and his arms wrapped around very zen like and just not say anything for hours, and he was driving me nuts because he seemed so calm. And finally he looked over at me and he said, Jessica, it will take the time it needs to take, no more, no less. And I was just like, it stopped me in my tracks because I am a fairly philosophical person, right? And so I had to sit with that. And I've thought about that so much because that is just one of the truest things there is about life, is that things take the time they need to take. And we are so not in control. We can't hack them. We can't rush them. I was going to therapy twice a week. I was doing EMDR. I did alternative therapies. I was on anxiety medication. I did yoga. I drank my teas. It's like all the things that you can possibly do to heal yourself, and you cannot fast track. You cannot rush your healing. It just takes the time it needs to take. And as far as fear is concerned, I, of course, am a human being, and so I feel afraid sometimes, but I do have an unshakable trust in the universe. And for me, that's my creator. And I believe that I will be okay in the end. And if it's not okay, then it's not the end. Sometimes, I hesitate making those declarations because I realize people are going through tremendous, tremendous pain. But I do believe that, like, the whole point of life in these experiences, the hard ones especially, is for us to figure out what we're really made of and what we really believe. And for me, that is that I am taken care of. I am supported. And life is just one big lesson in miracles.
I think I have the same mentality as you.
Mhm.
I've always felt held,
Yes.
and life hasn't always been
Yeah.
a candy parade for me either.
Yeah.
Um, but I think if you tell yourself that your story doesn't begin with you and it's not going to end with you, it's a
Mm.
little bit less pressure.
Yeah.
Um,
I love
I
that.
know my story begins with my great grandmother. She was
Mhm.
married off like when she was like 9. I mean, this is
Oh.
my life is her goddamn beyond
Trauma.
wildest dreams, no matter what happens.
Yeah.
No
Yeah.
matter what, right? You have great 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 grandmothers who couldn't leave the house because they were a widow at 20, and that was
Yeah.
it for the rest of their life. And by the way, they were the lucky ones.
Yeah.
Just you can point to so many stories.
Mhm.
That's something that has always kept me going, is the idea that I'm not that important and it's not
Yeah.
um it doesn't start with me, it doesn't end with me. I think having kids helps to reinforce that. And I
Mm.
really do wonder, how much better are you at being a mom than I am by virtue of what you've been through? Because talk about perspective, right? My son is like, this is the worst day of my life. And I'm like, let me tell you about, okay? You would be all, hold my beer, okay? I'd be like, don't make me call Jess. I'm going to call Jess, okay? Don't talk to me about the worst day of your life. Did we just make a joke about kidnapping? Is that okay?
We can do that. Yeah, we
Did it
can do that.
land? Okay.
We can do it. Lands. It lands. I make jokes all the time on social media. But I mean, I think I'm just like a regular mom. Like, my kids are, like, they get it. They're getting old enough. They understand. They can Google me. That's a little weird and scary. Um, but I mean, my daughter came home yesterday because she had a unpleasant interaction with a girl on the bus, and I was like, yeah, I remember what it's like to be 10. Girls are mean. I'm so sorry that happened. Yeah, that would hurt my feelings too. Like,
Mhm.
at the end of the day, I am a little bit hardcore because I'm Gen X. Like, we work hard, we play hard. I'm kind of like, I really was drinking out of a garden hose, and I think my mom locked me out for like 12 hours a day during the summertime. I like, yeah, my mom had kids so that we would fold all the laundry and put it away. Like, get over yourselves. Like, but
Yeah.
yeah, I don't know. I think, especially now, when time, like, in at the time of this recording, um, the world feels a little off kilter and unsafe. That is my primary concern, is that they know that they're safe. And I had a psychologist tell me that he was my psychologist that was assigned to me when I did the Department of Defense's hostage reintegration program, like
Read
12
about
hours after we were rescued. Dr. Ray, he's awesome. I saw him like a year after my son was born
them.
for dinner, and Eric, my husband, and I were like, what do we tell him about all of this? And he said, the most important thing a child ever needs to know is that they're safe. And I think we've always led with that. Like, we'll tell you the truth. So when you're ready to ask questions, we feel like you're ready to hear the answers. But the important thing is that you're safe.
It's kind of a universal thing, and it's nice because the simplicity of parenting on
Mhm.
some level keeps us going.
Yeah.
I interviewed a woman who was a former sex worker who then became
Mhm.
a New York City school teacher, and then she
Mhm.
got quote unquote outed, but she was mass media humiliated
Oh.
over everything, even though she wasn't actually trying to hide it. Gloria Allred represented her, and we talk about now she's a mother and what's she going to
Mm.
tell her kids.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
interviewed a woman who was sexually assaulted at a conference and then took her fight to Congress and actually lobbied bipartisan bill, got it passed, and to protect assault survivors in the workplace.
Amazing.
I interview another woman who's an astronaut explaining to her son why mommy's going to be gone for like 6 months on the
Yeah.
International Space Station.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
motherhood piece of it, it kind of deepens everything, but it also simplifies the
Mhm.
horrors that we go through, right? And it's such a gift to be a mom after you've been through these things.
Well, yeah, and that was the gift that, like, surprised the hell out of me because I got pregnant with my son 3 days after the rescue.
Wow.
So, yeah, like, my latest book that just came out last weekend, actually, it's The Pilgrimage of Motherhood. So, it's all about those motherhood journeys, right? Because that was felt like I was being held hostage in a whole other way, to
Yeah.
be honest. I was throwing up and sick for 8 months and petrified, talk about petrified that I was gonna lose my mind and what was gonna happen, what happened to my mom
Oh,
was gonna happen
right.
to me,
With the memories of your mom.
Yeah, and I had to trust my therapist when she told me, like, "You're okay. You're gonna be okay. Like, you're gonna be a great mom." And, that has been one heck of a journey for me. But and it's so interesting because, like, my son has the flu right now, and I was up most of the night with him. He's 12, but he was so miserable, and I felt so bad for him. And you're right, it is just really simple.
It's so simple.
They
It's such
don't
a
need
blessing.
anything besides just, like,
It's
I he just held my hand.
right,
That's
right.
it.
The other night I was going to sleep and my daughter comes and crawls in my bed and she's like a teeny tiny little cartoon character. I'm talking to her and she just puts her hand on my face and goes, "Mama, mama, I don't want to talk. I just want to look at your beautiful face."
Oh, sweet girl. That's it. That's
Where's the
all there is.
camera? Can I
Yeah.
play this as your ringtone
Yeah.
forever? Can
Yeah.
this be your ringtone when you're 15 and you hate me? But
Yeah, that's coming.
yeah. You're further along than I am. But I do want to go back to something, especially because you've got two kids.
Mhm.
And I've got two kids. And the biggest fear when women hear about kidnapping is sexual assault.
Mhm.
You talk about your mom being with you.
Mhm.
I don't believe it's possible she wasn't with you
Mhm.
for you to go through that. I kind of don't believe it's possible that she wasn't there. But to hear that you were not sexually assaulted during captivity, they hit you. They pointed a gun at you. They
Mhm.
threatened to sell you.
Mhm.
You know, your experience, I heard, of building rapport with your captors has been used in college courses.
They use it, yeah, they use it actually for, foreign service to build rapport. They
That's
use it in
crazy.
books, and yeah, I know it is crazy. I was like, "Wow, okay." First of all, how'd you know? But secondly, yeah, I mean, I connection is my superpower, and I know that now. And, it will save your life.
Did you think it was an instinct that kicked in to calm them or to connect with them? Well, it's not as if probably someone didn't think about doing it almost every day. You're the only woman there.
Yeah.
Do you think your instinct was to connect so that they wouldn't want to hurt you or to really empathize with them because you see that these are still just boys?
Mhm. Yeah, I think it was to empathize. So, or I wanted them to see me as human. I was older than a lot of them, right?
Yeah.
I was like
Yeah.
31, 32, and in Somali culture, I mean, women,
As a grandma.
girls, yeah. So that could have been part of it. Maybe they just thought I was kind of like an old lady, but, you know, also I talked about my son and
Yeah.
I talked about my husband and my baby. And I remember one time, we had a proof of life call and then came back and I was emotional, and we called him Colonel. He was he seemed like old as dirt, but he was probably only like in his early 50s. And he said, "Did you talk to your baby?" And I said, "Yes, I talked." No, there was no baby, but yes, I talked to my baby. I talked to my, I was crying, and he was like genuinely happy for me, that I talked to my baby. Like, I think in some ways, the guys on the ground, like, they weren't like the masterminds behind this. They were just hired to keep guard. So I think in a lot of ways some of them felt sorry for me, and
That
I
does
felt
make
sorry
sense
for
to me.
them.
That makes sense to me because it was 93 days.
Yeah.
So the idea that you said at one point my kidnapping was not personal. Um, but yeah, it makes sense that if it's 93 days, the guys really pulling the strings in the back are not out there in the desert with you for 93
No,
days. These are the
they're
guys
not
that
on the
work
front,
there.
and they're not the ones that eventually lost their lives, right?
Yeah, exactly. Um, I want to talk about your rescue. So you were working for the Danish aid group. They had kidnapping insurance.
Mhm.
The hostage negotiator was communicating with them this
Mhm.
whole time. And then at some point, Obama gets word of your UTI and kidney infection.
He'd been briefed. My understanding is that he was being briefed every day. That was like on the docket of updates, the American hostage being held in Somalia. And so my last proof of life call, unbeknownst to me, was January 16th, 2012. And I told the family communicator what I was experiencing and that I really needed medical help because I was very ill, like high fevers, in immense pain, to the point where I was crawling to bushes. I was throwing up. Like, I knew it was going into a kidney infection because I'd had one a couple of years prior and I'd spent a week in the hospital. So I knew I needed IV, I needed antibiotics, I needed to not be a hostage in the desert if I was going to survive. And I mean, I'm not a medical expert, but I figured maybe I had a couple of weeks left because, when you have an infection like that, it can go into sepsis and then you're dead.
Well, the fact that you knew that that's where it was going is
I
what
knew,
sets,
I
because
could
there's so
feel
much
it.
grace in your story. The
Yeah.
fact that you knew that it would go there versus just thinking I maybe have a stomach bug or something.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I knew my body well, and I struggled with UTIs. Like, everybody's got their thing. That was my
Yeah.
thing when I was like in my 20s and early 30s. And so
Yeah,
I
and
was
they're the
like,
worst
oh,
under the best
oh,
circumstances.
oh, here we go. Yeah, I was in so much excruciating pain. And so I know, and the aftermath, I then found out that the communicator took the list of symptoms to whoever. Somehow that information got to my husband, Eric. He went to my doctor to verify. And my doctor said to him, "Eric, you got to get her out of there. She's going to die." And so he took that information and feedback to the FBI, who is working on my case, Matt Espenshade, who's the lead attaché, amazing individual. And I mean, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for his round the clock commitment to my case. And he took it to whoever he takes it to, and it worked its way up. And I've been told that as soon as they found out an American had been taken hostage, SEAL Team 6 started working, doing their exercises and their drills and working out a rescue procedure. And they were just they were just ready. Like, they were practicing and rehearsing and rehearsing and rehearsing until they got the go ahead. And they finally, there are a couple of circumstances that have to be in play in order for a military intervention to be deemed necessary. And one of those is if the hostage life is in real grave danger, that there's an impending
Kidney
loss of life.
infection did
Yeah,
that.
and that's what they declared that. And so 10 days later, 9 days later, yeah, January 25th, I went to bed. I use that term loosely. I laid down on a mat with a blanket, fell asleep, woke up a couple hours later because I was sick. And I said toilet to ask for a permission to leave my mat. There were 9 pirates on the ground that night. They were all passed out, which was very odd. I didn't understand why, because there was always one who was like keeping
Like a
watch,
watch, a
guard. Yeah.
watch. Yeah, you keep a
They
watch.
worked in shifts. They had to. But they were all passed out, like snoring. Like, I was like,
Well, and
toilet,
it's been
toilet.
93
Yeah,
days.
yeah.
They don't
And I
think
mean,
anybody's
I
coming
don't think,
either.
yeah. And so I think they had just gotten lazy and kind of complacent. They had
Yeah.
eaten a goat that day. And so I think, they were their bellies were full. It was kind of like Thanksgiving dinner, right? You know, like you just
Wow.
are tired, your belly's full, and I think that's what happened. And no one woke up, so I pick up a small flashlight, like a pen light that has like clicky, and they had given it to me at some point, I guess, so I could find my way to a bush in the middle of the night, which was nice, I guess. So, you know, but I start flashing it because in case somebody wakes up, I don't want them to think I've run off and I
That
just
you
tried
ran
to escape.
away.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm flashing it as I go to the bush. I do what I need to do. I come back, I wrap myself up in my blanket, and as I'm trying to get myself settled back in, it sounds like an animal is walking toward us or something, because there were like these tall tufts of grass, and it sounds like the grasses are breaking. And I'm kind of like, I don't know why it's weird, but I just like never really worried about animals or snakes. I mean, there were snakes around, there were scorpions. Like you just can't go there. Like you just can't lay there and worry about it. So I just like rolled back up in my blanket and tried to go back to sleep. But about 30 seconds after I do that, the night erupts into automatic gunfire. And I'm thinking, oh my God, like the pirate on my left, I can sense that he's standing there. He's got his gun. He's whisper screaming at everybody else to wake up. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, what's happening? Pull the blanket up over my face. There's so many bullets. Like I can see the sparks when the like bullets are being fired, and they're hitting these guys, and they're falling to the ground. And I'm thinking, like, I'm really not going to survive this, am I?
And you're still not thinking this is someone to save you. You're just
No,
thinking
no, no,
there's a
no.
fight going on in the middle of the
Yeah,
desert
it's
tonight.
another group. Maybe it's AlShabab. Like, no, never in a million years did it cross my mind that the American military would like come and save us. I didn't know that they did that stuff, you know? I don't know. I just didn't know. Like, it just never
Why
crossed my
would you?
mind. Why would
Why
I?
would you know? And why
Yeah.
would you think that the entire US government is going to put the
Yeah.
force of
None
SEAL
of that.
Team
None of
6
it. Yeah.
after you? Because we think of SEAL Team 6, we think, oh
Osama bin
God,
Laden.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, we think they're
Yeah.
going after Osama bin Laden. We think um, a dignitary's been kidnapped and these guys are going to parachute in like
The
Belcanto.
stuff that movies are made out of,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
but yours was the stuff of movies too.
Yeah.
So,
It was,
so I heard you talk about somebody just kind of like throws you over their shoulder and runs off into the desert. Now you still don't even know who you're being carried by?
I mean, no. I knew they had identified themselves as military. They were Americans.
Yeah.
I'm in shock. I'm just shaking. I can't stop shaking. And he puts me down, and my first question is, where's Paul? Did he make it out alive? He did. He's there. And he leans over and says, Jessica, do you know who these guys are? And I'm like, kind of like, like, does it even matter? Like, who cares?
Yes.
Like, who cares? And he's like, this is SEAL Team 6. These are the guys that got Osama bin Laden. And I'm just like, what? I mean, I'm a school teacher from Ohio. Like, what the heck?
And God bless America.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm the luckiest girl alive, and I do not say that lightly. Like, there are 62,000 reasons why I shouldn't be sitting here having this conversation with you today, but I'm glad I am.
Navy SEALs are another breed. They are another
Yes.
type of human.
Yeah, it's crazy.
And the best of the best
Yeah.
don't make it through Navy SEAL
Yeah.
training, much less SEAL Team 6.
Yeah.
So these people are beyond what I really do think they are beyond what human beings were designed to do.
Mhm.
What I thought was really emotional was you describe at some point they carry you off and then they're waiting for the helicopter to come and they lay you down on the ground and lay on top of you to cover you.
Yeah.
They don't think about themselves.
No, they don't.
Have you ever had a chance to meet or thank them?
A few of them, not all of them.
You just cried? You just crumple on the floor
Oh
and
yeah,
cry?
I spent an entire day with several of them, and I just cried. Like, I was so undignified.
You're
But
like, I
it was,
love you.
yeah, it was that was such an important moment in my healing journey, because it was so important for me, that they understood how grateful I was, and continue to be, and that I'm doing my best to raise good, responsible children who are contributing members to society, and then I'm doing my best to give back in any way I can. And you know, it was interesting because I remember walking away from that day completely wrung out because I had cried so much and they looked so uncomfortable.
I was gonna ask
This
you.
was a woman. They were just like, "Oh my God, please stop crying.
I was
It's
gonna
really
ask
okay."
how is SEAL Team 6 with thank you?
Uncomfortable.
I mean, we know they don't do it for a thank you,
No,
but I
because they're
wonder,
just
I would
doing
assume
their
it makes them
job.
uncomfortable. I would assume
Yeah.
it makes them really uncomfortable.
But I remember one of them saying to me, I hugged one of them for the last time, and he said something, and I can't get it verbatim, but it was to the effect, and it made me understand. He was like, like basically like, we think you're kind of a badass too,
Oh,
and I walked away from that feeling 10 feet tall because I had really struggled for a long time. I wanted to honor them in my storytelling, of how I recounted this story, but I didn't know like what character I was in the story that I was telling. And after that moment, I mean, of course, it took me some time to process, but I realized, you know what, there can be more than one hero in a story.
it's
And that was
amazing.
really empowering for me. And it's
It
not like I
also
needed their permission, but I needed them to know. Yeah, I needed them to know how grateful I was.
it gives you some insight into the mind of a Navy SEAL because I thought it was going to be more like they're saying, in a way, your kidnapping wasn't personal to the kidnappers. Your saving is not personal to us. We do the job, right? Not that they don't care, but I thought
Yeah.
it was going to be like something, some version of that. But in fact, they're kind of elevating you, right? They're saying it's our job to save. It was your job to survive, and you did that.
Yeah. Yeah.
The fact that they're elevating that means they know we are not made the same way they are made, and survival is not a guarantee, and you
Yeah.
did it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's they're just such a special community too, and they've just really welcomed me and my family into it. And yeah, it is. It's really interesting, and I'm really grateful.
Sometimes when I think about those types of guys, I think, I feel a little sad for them.
Mm,
I know they're amazing. I know, like I said, they're superhuman in a lot of ways. But I think it requires, and maybe at some point I'll interview a member of SEAL Team 6 and I'll ask them this question. I think it requires a level of suspension of your humanity to be
mhm.
able to put yourself in that many situations again and again, because you have to almost think you're not human. You are a machine. You are
Yeah.
the strongest animal. You are not in an I'm a badass kind of a way, but basically like, in order to do this thing, I have to believe nothing is impossible. And that's not a human condition.
Mm,
So can you be happy? Can you be okay if you're a member of SEAL Team 6? I know you can do great things, but can you be okay is kind of the question. And if I did, they'll just be like, interesting question.
well, I
And
might
I
be
just
able to
imagine they'll be
I might
like,
be able
this
to
is a
hook you
weird
up.
interview, right? They'll
I
be like,
might be
you're
able to
not
hook
going to
you
make
up.
me cry. I've never cried in my life. My tear ducts, I swallowed my own tear ducts. Like, they don't exist. Nice try,
I
lady.
can make them cry.
Can
I
you?
can make them cry.
Well, you can make them cry, but that's because you guys are bonded. With me, they'd be like, have a nice day, ma'am. Like, they'd be like, no, you're not, no.
Well, we could always see. We can always check.
Well,
Mm.
and I know that after they got you, then Obama called your dad. Obama calling your dad to say that you're
Where
alive,
do you
like
see the picture there? Yeah. Yeah. I
that's just
mean,
amazing. That's
it's
just
amazing.
it's beyond.
What a incredible gesture.
Ah, and what joy it must have been to be able to make that call. Do you know what happened to everyone who was consistently one of your captors?
No.
No.
There were 9 guys on the ground that night. They all died.
Yeah.
Um which was hard to like actually process. Like then it goes into some really existential questions of like whose life is worth more, and it's just like those are never questions that I'm gonna have answers to.
Yeah.
But I do not know particulars. I think some have been put in prison. So I bet they're, I don't know. Like there's so many things I don't know.
You spend 93 days with people. There's a level of empathy there or connection there. There are moments, I'm
Yes.
sure, of grace along the way that you can hold on to.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, you're in the back of your mind, it seems like you're going back to they didn't have the constellation of choices that I did. There's a reason they became a kidnapper in the desert.
Yeah.
I had a constellation of choices, they had a constellation of choices, and that's just
It's the injustice of life.
of the human condition, right?
Mhm.
You moved to Somalia to help. You survived
Yeah.
93 days in the desert, in many cases, by the grace of God.
Yeah.
And I know that also after the fact, you came home, you had a baby soon after.
Mhm.
And I know that you learned that the driver was the one that handed you over to the kidnappers.
Yeah.
How long after did you find out?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think we were like filling in the details for months, you know? But yes, we then learned that we had been basically trafficked. We'd been sold for $100,000.
And many people would assume that safety is all someone like you could possibly crave for the rest of their lives. And look, I don't want to make light of it. And I'm sure you do laugh a lot of the time, but this is the type of thing that stays with someone. This is the
Mhm.
type of thing you kind of process forever. And then, according to your Instagram, your word of the year was experiment,
Mhm.
which made me so happy. Because, like, the thing is, you just keep living.
Yeah.
I love that so much. I saw
Yeah.
that. I was like, man, I got to talk to this woman.
Aw,
Book the time. I got to
so
talk to this
glad.
woman.
I'm so glad
Why
you
is
think
your 2025 word of the year experiment?
so. I think that we are so bound up by like the confines of labels and stereotypes and perhaps job descriptions, and I want to explore those edges and
Mm.
push beyond them. Since you know started my own business, do a lot of speaking. I'm usually don't know what I'm doing. And so it's just all like a faith walk and an experiment. And there are things that I really want to experiment with this year and see if they work and learn from them if they don't and learn from them if they do. I think life is about experimenting. And I think we, get so locked into just thinking we have to do it a certain way. And I have the privilege of surviving trauma that gives me another perspective.
We also get locked in by our history,
That's very, very, very good point.
and we don't have to. Part of the way
Mhm.
we process our history is by writing about it. Can you tell me about the mission of your publishing company?
Yeah, thank you. Absolutely. So we only work with women because that's just who I feel compelled to support.
And
And
we have
we
the best stories. I mean, I'm just saying,
we do
just we
have
have the best
really good
stories.
stories. We do. So we say we publish memoir manifestos. You've been through something, now you know something, and you want to teach us something. So those are the three necessary components in the manuscripts that we work with. And I have lost track with the number of authors that we've worked with and the books that we've put out. We specialize in anthologies, so we put together these curated experiences where we work with groups of women, 20, 25 women throughout the year, and we help them write their memoir, and then we publish it and we celebrate and we build community and we support each other, and it's just really beautiful. And so there are lots of things within like the context of business that I'm experimenting with. And it's really fun. It's such a privilege. And I can't believe that I get to wake up and do this every day for my work.
Or perhaps that you even get to wake up at all.
Yes, there's that too. Oh, you know where to find me.
But, I will say that we talked about your mom passing a year before your kidnapping, and you described kind of swimming in the memories.
Mm,
And, you're really savoring. You talk about you were forgiving, and then you were asking for forgiveness, but you were also savoring your
mhm,
life.
mhm.
And that's really beautiful. And then you were able to kind of put that there and then start to dream and to plan. And I'm sure it was a bit of a mental tactic to get yourself
Yeah.
positive about the future, because obviously there's something to, whether you want to call it manifestation, positive mindset, whatever you want to call it, there's something to that. But even in the midst of the scariest and possibly final moments, if you are not proof that we always have a choice, I do not know who is.
Mm.
So thank you for being my guest.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure and just the rich conversation.